Welcome back to part 11 of this quiz application tutorial using AngularJS. And in this video, we're going to continue building out the markup with Bootstrap for each of the questions in our quiz. And we're kicking off part 11 of this AngularJS series. And in this part, we're going to create the markup for the actual question. So without any more waiting around, let's jump straight into the HTML. And we'll create a row just to start things off. And then at the top of the row, we'll create an H3 and we'll just say question, colon. And then below that, we'll create the well, which is the gray area. And we'll make it a small well. We'll expand that and we'll create a row. And we want to just split it up full width. So we'll make it a full 12 columns. And then we'll give it an H4. And this inside this H4 is where we'll actually place the question. But unlike above with the buttons, we can't use NGrepeat. Well, we could, but we're not going to. So what is going to happen is we're going to set a flag inside our quiz controller for what the active question is. And we'll default it to 0 because that'll be the first question. And the reason we're not using NGrepeat is twofold. So NGrepeat would just repeat all of the questions and put them all in a line, one below each other. And we could do that. But the way I've made this quiz, I've made it with a continue button, which will take you on to the next question. So that's one reason why we're not using NGrepeat. And the second reason is each of these buttons up here is clickable. So if I click on this one, it takes me to the 7th question. I click here, it takes me to the 2nd question, etc. So we want these to be clickable, these questions here. Up here, and that will take you. So we can create a function when we click each of these which will just change the active question, and then in the question area it will just display the active question. So we'll head back into here and we'll go into our quiz controller and we'll create vm.activeQuestion and we'll default it to 0. So by default it will be 0. And then we can come into our H4 here, and inside this binding we can say quiz.activeQuestion. So that'll just display the number of the active question. But the problem is this is 0 index, and most people work in base starting from 1. So we'll just add 1 to this. And then we'll add a little full stop, which is just styling it out so that at the start of the question it just says 1 dot and then a space and then the question, so we have a bit of a reference. That's all that's doing. And then after the second quote we can say plus quiz.data service, and now we can hook into the data service and go quiz questions, and then this quiz questions is obviously indexable, so we can put in an index. So we could say index 0, index 2, index 3 or whatever, but we're not going to do that. We're going to say quiz.activeQuestion. So now it'll fetch the index of the active question. But then of course if we just do that, it's going to return the entire object. So if we save that and come back into our work in progress, it's going to fetch the entire object, which is not what we want. So on top of that, so we're going into the quiz controller, fetching the data service property, which is an object, fetching the quiz questions object from that, or the quiz questions property from that object, and then using the square brackets to go into an index and going into the index of the active question. So all we're doing so far is fetching one of these questions, one of these objects inside this quiz questions JSON. But then we can say .text and reach the text property, which is the quiz question itself. So then we can say .text and now save and head back and start quiz. How much can a loggerhead weigh? That is the question. And it says 1 dot space and then the question. So this expression might look a bit strange when we're saying quiz.activeQuestion plus 1 plus this, but all we're doing is placing the index of the question followed by the question. Okay. So then after that, we'll create another row, and inside this, we will create each question. So each question takes up half the width. So if we look at the final product, each question takes up half the width. So we'll create a 6 column wide area. So inside this row, we'll say call, and we'll say on small screens and above. So when you're on mobile devices, each question will just take up the full width instead of half, but when you're on bigger screens, it will take up half. Expand that out. And then we want to NGrepeat this area for every question, and then display each possible answer. We're taking the active question, and then we'll NGrepeat through each possible answer. So we've got an active question, and then we NGrepeat for each possible answer. So we'll do that in here and say NGrepeat answer in quiz.dataService.quiz questions quiz.activeQuestion.possibilities. And now it's going to loop through for each of those. And then actually inside here, we take answer.answer. And now we can check what we've got. Start quiz. And there we go. We've got each of these. Of course, we're going to need to style it a bit better than that, but that's what we've got. So we'll style it now. So we'll take this binding out, and we'll put each of those inside an H4. Like that. And then on this H4, we will give it a class of answer, which is our own class, and we'll use that to style in the CSS. So now we'll open up our CSS style.css here, and we'll say .answer. So we'll say padding, we'll say maybe 15 pixels on top and bottom and 20 pixels on the sides. Border radius equals 10 pixels, and we'll give it a border 1 pixel solid, and we'll make it BBB. Then close that and head back, and there we go, we've styled it a bit better. And then one thing we'll also add in is a hover state on those. So we'll open up the style CSS again and say answer hover cursor pointer, just so that we have that pointer cursor so the user knows that you can click on it. So now we can hover. So that is good. So now at the end of each question, at the end of the well, we need to add a button so the user can continue. So we'll say continue, and then we'll give this a class of button and button warning. and then we'll give it an ngClick directive, and we'll trigger a function on our quiz controller called questionAnswered. So every time a question is answered, i.e. they've clicked continue, that function will be triggered. So now we'll come into our quiz controller and we'll create vm.questionAnswered equals question answered, so still using the named function syntax. Function question answered. And now that we've created the function, we can add the logic, and that's what we will do in the next video. For those of you that haven't checked out my website yet, I do a full article write-up for every single video that I put out on YouTube, and that will include code snippets and other little things that will help you along. The link to the write-up for the current video is on the bottom left of the screen. And if you just want to continue watching this video series, then just click the link in the center of the screen and we'll get started with the next video.